The sound of the city outside was like a distant storm, muffled behind thick glass walls, but in his mansion there was only silence. An empty chair faced a grand desk, strewn with unopened mail and a watch that had stopped ticking the moment his world changed. And yet, in that sterile quietude, the CEO sat alone, a man whose fortune was measured in billions, but whose soul was bankrupt. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're looking at an old photograph or remembering something you lost long ago. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise you, today's story will touch your soul. This is the story of Andrew Dawson, a man who built a media empire in the relentless heart of Chicago. The wind off Lake Michigan carried the scent of snow and diesel fuel through the streets below. But 30 floors up in his penthouse office, Andrew breathed only recycled air and the metallic taste of isolation. His wealth stretched beyond comprehension. Stock portfolios worth hundreds of millions, cryptocurrency investments that fluctuated like his own unstable heartbeat, real estate holdings from Manhattan to Malibu. Every morning, his financial advisors delivered reports showing numbers that most people couldn't even pronounce, yet Andrew felt poorer than a beggar on Lower Wacker Drive. The mahogany desk before him bore the weight of success, contracts worth billions, acquisition proposals, merger documents that could reshape entire industries. His fingers traced the cold surface, remembering when his mother used to polish the same wood in their tiny South Side apartment 40 years ago. She had scrubbed floors so he could attend Northwestern, had worked double shifts at the diner so he could buy his first suit for job interviews. Now, her photograph sat in a silver frame, frozen in time, her eyes holding the same warmth he'd forgotten how to feel. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board, its lights flickering in patterns that reminded him of stock market charts. Trading floors buzzed with activity, portfolios gained and lost millions by the second. But Andrew remained motionless, trapped in a luxury that felt more like a glass prison. The leather chair where he spent 16-hour days had molded to his body, becoming as much a part of him as the emptiness that gnawed at his chest. His assistant had long ago learned not to disturb him during these moments when he stared into the abyss of his own making. The accident replayed in his mind like a broken record, each detail sharp as broken glass. The intersection of Michigan Avenue and Ontario Street, the traffic light that had just turned green, his mother's silver Camry, a car he'd insisted on buying her despite her protests about being too extravagant, crumpled like paper against a delivery truck. The paramedic's words echoed in the marble halls of his memory. "She asked for you. She said to tell Andrew she was proud." But Andrew had been in a boardroom in Tokyo, negotiating a deal worth $300 million, too important to answer his phone when she called. In the 2 years since her funeral, Andrew's penthouse had transformed into a mausoleum of regret. Clocks throughout the mansion had stopped at different times, as if time itself rebelled against continuing in a world without her presence. The grandfather clock in the foyer remained frozen at 3:47 p.m., the exact moment the hospital called. Kitchen windows stayed shuttered, blocking out the unpredictable warmth of sunlight that might dare to suggest life continued beyond his grief. Even his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, moved through the rooms like a ghost, dusting furniture that accumulated sorrow instead of memories. His investment strategies had made him legendary on Wall Street, a man who could predict market movements like reading weather patterns. Bitcoin Ventures had multiplied his wealth exponentially during the cryptocurrency boom. His diversified portfolio included precious metals, foreign currencies, and renewable energy stocks that positioned him perfectly for future decades. Yet, all this financial acumen meant nothing when measured against the poverty of his spirit. Money flowed through his accounts like digital rivers, but his heart remained an arid wasteland where nothing could grow. The mahogany-paneled walls of his study held awards and accolades: Businessman of the Year, Philanthropist of the Decade, Visionary Leader. But the titles felt like beautiful lies, decorative certificates for a life lived in service to numbers rather than people. His mother's voice whispered through memory. "Money is a tool, Andrew, not a master." She would have been disappointed to see what her son had become, a man so wealthy he'd forgotten what it meant to be rich in the things that mattered. Downtown Chicago pulsed with its own rhythm beyond his windows. Street vendors sold hot dogs and roasted chestnuts to tourists, bundled against the October chill. Children's laughter echoed from Millennium Park, where families gathered to watch their little ones chase pigeons and marvel at Cloudgate's mirror surface. But Andrew had forgotten the sound of genuine joy, had insulated himself so thoroughly from human connection that even the city's heartbeat seemed foreign and distant. His wealth had built walls higher than any skyscraper, and now he sat atop his tower of success, alone with his billions and his ghosts. The buzzing of his phone shattered the silence. Another meeting, another deal, another opportunity to amass more wealth he didn't need. But for once, Andrew ignored it. Something in the autumn air called to him, a restlessness he hadn't felt since childhood. Perhaps it was the way shadows fell across his Persian carpet, or the distant sound of church bells from St. James Cathedral. Whatever force moved him, it was stronger than his usual paralysis. He rose from his chair, straightened his Italian wool coat, and walked toward the elevator with no destination in mind except away from the golden cage of his own creation. That afternoon, fate wore the face of coincidence and dressed itself in autumn leaves. Andrew found himself walking through Lincoln Park, a neighborhood he hadn't visited since his Northwestern days. The trees blazed with October colors, reds and golds that reminded him of his mother's favorite scarf, the one she'd worn to his graduation. Families strolled past, pushing strollers, their conversations mixing languages and laughter in a symphony he'd forgotten existed. The scent of apple cider and cinnamon drifted from a nearby cafe, and for a moment, Andrew's carefully constructed walls trembled. He was adjusting his cashmere scarf against the lake breeze when he noticed her, a small girl sitting alone on a weathered park bench beneath a canopy of golden maple leaves. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark hair that caught the afternoon sunlight and eyes that seemed too wise for her tiny face. Her clothes were worn but clean, a red winter coat that had seen better seasons and small boots that probably came from a thrift store. But there was something luminous about her, as if she carried her own source of light in a world that had grown dim for Andrew. The child held a crumpled piece of paper in her small hands, and her lips moved in what might have been song or prayer. The melody was so soft Andrew had to step closer to hear it, a lullaby his own mother used to hum while she folded laundry in their cramped kitchen. The coincidence struck him like lightning, and he found himself approaching the bench without conscious decision. The girl looked up as his shadow fell across her, and when their eyes met, Andrew felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the ice that had formed around his heart. "I'm part of your destiny," she said with the matter-of-fact confidence only children possess. Her voice carried no hesitation, no doubt, as if she'd been waiting her entire young life to deliver this message to this particular man on this particular afternoon. The words hung in the crisp air between them, more profound than any business proposal Andrew had ever heard, more valuable than any financial projection his analysts had ever presented. Andrew's first instinct was to laugh, and he did, a sound like dead leaves scraping against pavement. The idea seemed absurd, almost offensive in its simplicity. How could a child from this modest neighborhood, wearing second-hand clothes and clutching what appeared to be a grocery list, claim to be connected to his destiny? He was Andrew Dawson, master of billion-dollar acquisitions, commander of investment strategies that moved markets. His destiny was written in stock certificates and capital gains, not in the innocent words of a little girl who probably didn't even know what destiny meant. Yet something in her gaze unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Her eyes held depths that reminded him of ancient wells, and when she smiled at his dismissal, it wasn't with the hurt pride of a child who'd been mocked, but with the patient sadness of someone who understood more than she should. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her coat pocket, then stood up with a dignity that made Andrew's expensive suits feel like costumes. "When you're ready," she said simply, "you'll know where to find me." Then she walked away, her small boots crunching through fallen leaves, leaving Andrew standing alone with questions he couldn't answer. For days afterward, the encounter haunted him like a melody stuck in memory. During board meetings, he found himself doodling little girls with wise eyes on the margins of financial reports. While reviewing quarterly earnings that showed record-breaking profits, he wondered about the paper in the child's pocket. His portfolio managers presented cryptocurrency projections and renewable energy investments worth hundreds of millions. But Andrew's attention drifted to the window, searching the streets below for a flash of red coat and dark hair. The skepticism that had initially greeted the girl's words gradually transformed into something more troubling: curiosity. Andrew prided himself on rational thinking, on his ability to analyze risk and calculate probability with the precision of a computer. He'd built his fortune by trusting facts, not feelings, by following market trends rather than mystical pronouncements from children in parks. Yet he found himself returning to Lincoln Park the following week, telling himself he needed fresh air, knowing it was a lie. She was there again, this time feeding breadcrumbs to a small gathering of sparrows. The birds showed no fear of her tiny hands, perching on her shoulders and eating from her palm as if she were some urban Snow White. Andrew watched from a distance, noting how naturally she moved in the world, how the autumn afternoon seemed brighter in her immediate vicinity. When she noticed him watching, she waved with the enthusiasm of someone greeting an old friend, and despite every logical instinct, Andrew found himself walking toward her bench. "I told you you'd be back," she said, patting the seat beside her. "The birds told me you were coming." Her matter-of-fact acceptance of his presence irritated and charmed him simultaneously. In his world, meetings were scheduled weeks in advance, interactions were planned and purposeful. This child seemed to live in a realm where magic was mundane and certainty came from sources his Harvard MBA had never studied. Andrew sat down, his $1,000 shoes looking absurdly formal against the park's casual atmosphere. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. He'd spent decades trained to ask about portfolios and profit margins. Simple human inquiries felt foreign on his tongue. "Lily," she replied, scattering more crumbs for the sparrows. "And you're Andrew. You used to laugh more when you were little." The statement landed like a physical blow, not because it was accusatory, but because it was true. Somewhere in the process of building his empire, he'd forgotten how to find joy in small moments, had traded laughter for leverage and wonder for wealth. The conversation that followed broke every rule of Andrew's carefully ordered existence. Lily spoke about dreams and angels, about how the wind carried messages if you knew how to listen. She asked him about his favorite color and seemed genuinely delighted when he admitted it was still blue, like his mother's eyes. When she inquired about his family, the question opened wounds he'd spent 2 years trying to seal, and to his amazement, he found himself talking about his mother's death, about guilt and loneliness, to a child who listened with the intensity of the most expensive therapist. The sparrows eventually flew away as shadows lengthened, but neither Andrew nor Lily seemed inclined to leave. She told him about her own life, how her mama worked 2 jobs and still worried about making rent, how they lived in a studio apartment where you could touch both walls by stretching your arms. Yet she spoke without complaint, even with gratitude for small blessings like free lunch at school and library books that took her anywhere she wanted to go. Her contentment in circumstances that would have driven Andrew to despair revealed the vast distance between having money and possessing richness. As autumn deepened into winter, Andrew found his visits to Lincoln Park becoming as essential as checking his investment accounts. He began to structure his days around these encounters, leaving board meetings early to ensure he wouldn't miss Lily's afternoon appearances. His assistant noticed the change in his schedule, but said nothing, perhaps recognizing that something fundamental was shifting in her employer's carefully controlled universe. The transformation started subtly. Clocks in his penthouse began keeping time again, as if Lily's presence had somehow restored their purpose. The child possessed an uncanny ability to see through his expensive facades to the lonely man underneath. When Andrew spoke about market volatility or cryptocurrency fluctuations, she listened with polite attention before redirecting the conversation to what really mattered, whether he was sleeping well, if he remembered to eat more than protein bars and coffee, how long it had been since he'd really looked at the sky. Her questions were simple but surgical, cutting through layers of professional armor to reach places he'd forgotten existed. Their conversations ranged across subjects Andrew hadn't considered in decades. Lily spoke about her favorite books, mostly fairy tales, where kindness triumphed over cruelty and love conquered all varieties of evil. She shared her dreams of becoming a teacher someday, of helping other children learn to read and find magic in stories. When she asked about his dreams, Andrew realized he couldn't remember having any that didn't involve profit margins or market share. The disparity between her aspirations and his acquisitions highlighted how far he'd drifted from anything resembling purpose. One particularly cold December afternoon, Lily arrived at their usual bench carrying a thermos of hot chocolate her mother had made. She insisted on sharing it, pouring the sweet liquid into the thermos cap for Andrew to drink. The gesture was so simple, so generous despite her obvious poverty, that it nearly broke him. He couldn't remember the last time someone had taken care of him rather than the other way around. The hot chocolate tasted like childhood, like Christmas mornings when his mother would wake him early to watch snowfall on their tiny balcony. The financial world continued to spin around Andrew's gradually changing priorities. His investment portfolios performed brilliantly without his obsessive micromanagement. Bitcoin values soared, his renewable energy stocks split twice, and merger opportunities arrived daily in his inbox. Yet these triumphs felt increasingly hollow compared to the simple pleasure of hearing Lily laugh at his clumsy attempts to feed the sparrows or the profound satisfaction of seeing her face light up when he remembered details from their previous conversations. Lily's wisdom seemed to flow from some inexhaustible well of understanding. When Andrew expressed frustration with his board of directors, she suggested he think about what his mama would want him to do. When he worried about a risky investment in emerging markets, she reminded him that sometimes you have to plant seeds without knowing what will grow. Her childlike observations contained truths that decades of business education had somehow missed, insights that made Andrew question everything he thought he knew about success and significance. The park itself began to feel different during their meetings. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more musical, as if Lily's presence possessed some mysterious ability to make the world more alive. Other visitors started recognizing them, the well-dressed businessman and the little girl in the red coat who sat together feeding birds and talking softly. Some smiled at what they assumed was a grandfather and granddaughter sharing precious time together. If only they knew how desperately Andrew needed these sessions, how Lily had become his lifeline to something approaching real life. Winter evenings in Chicago were brutal, with wind that sliced through even the finest wool coats. But Andrew found himself reluctant to end their visits. Lily seemed equally unwilling to leave, as if she understood something important was happening between them, some kind of healing that required patience and time. She would talk about God sometimes, not in the way adults discussed religion with complicated theology and ancient grievances, but with the simple faith of someone who saw evidence of divine love in snowflakes and warm blankets, and friends who showed up when you needed them most. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, a connection that transcended their obvious differences in age, wealth, and experience. Andrew began to understand what Lily meant about destiny, not some predetermined path written in stone, but the recognition that certain people entered your life precisely when you needed them most. She had appeared during his darkest season, bringing light he didn't even know he was missing. Now, the thought of returning to his empty penthouse without these daily encounters felt unbearable. But even as their friendship deepened, shadows gathered on the horizon. Andrew noticed subtle changes in Lily's routine that suggested trouble at home. She arrived looking tired some days, with worry lines that seemed too heavy for her young face. When he asked about her mother, Lily's usual cheerfulness flickered slightly before she insisted everything was fine. Yet Andrew's newly awakened instincts suggested otherwise, and he began to fear that the pure light this child had brought into his world might be threatened by circumstances beyond either of their control. Maria Santos had been watching her daughter's unusual friendship with growing concern and confusion. As a single mother working 2 jobs, cleaning offices downtown before dawn and stocking shelves at a grocery store until midnight, she had little time for extended conversations with Lily about her afternoon activities. But the change in her daughter was impossible to ignore. Lily came home each evening glowing with stories about her friend Andrew, a man Maria increasingly worried might be too good to be true. The neighborhood around their studio apartment was not kind to fairy tales. Maria had seen too many children hurt by adults who offered candy and promises before revealing darker intentions. When Lily began mentioning expensive gifts, books, art supplies, even a small electronic tablet for schoolwork, Maria's protective instincts flared like warning sirens. No legitimate friendship between a wealthy businessman and an 8-year-old girl made sense in her experience of the world. Her own faith had been tested by circumstances that seemed designed to break spirits and crush dreams. Working 16-hour days just to keep their tiny apartment and put food on the table left little room for believing in benevolent strangers or miraculous interventions. When Lily spoke about Andrew with the kind of trust and affection usually reserved for family members, Maria felt the familiar chill of impending disaster. Her daughter was too innocent, too willing to see good in everyone, especially wealthy men whose motives remained murky. The whispers started at Lily's school when teachers noticed her new supplies and improved academic performance. Someone mentioned seeing her with an older man in expensive clothes, feeding birds in Lincoln Park. In a community where survival required constant vigilance, such observations quickly transformed into suspicions. Maria received a concerned call from Lily's teacher, then another from a social worker who'd heard about the unusual friendship. Each conversation amplified her fears and reinforced her conviction that something terrible was about to happen to her precious child. Social services scheduled a home visit to discuss Lily's concerning association with an adult male. The phrase made Maria's blood turn to ice, conjuring images of courtrooms and custody battles and all the ways the system could destroy what little stability they'd managed to create. She had fought too hard to build their small life together, working jobs that destroyed her body and spirit just to give Lily a chance at something better. The thought of losing her daughter to bureaucratic concerns or predatory wolves in expensive suits filled her with rage and terror. Andrew remained unaware of the gathering storm as he continued his daily visits with Lily. Their conversations had grown more intimate and trusting, with both sharing fears and hopes they'd never voiced to anyone else. He told her about his mother's dreams for his future, about how success had become a prison he'd built around himself. She spoke about her wishes for her mother's happiness, about prayers she whispered each night for families who had enough food and warm beds. The innocence of their connection made the approaching crisis all the more tragic. On a particularly cold January morning, Maria made the difficult decision to follow her daughter to the park. She watched from behind a cluster of evergreen trees as Lily ran to embrace Andrew as he helped her feed the birds with gentle patience. As they sat together talking and laughing like family members who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. The scene looked so normal, so wholesome, that for a moment Maria's fears wavered. Then she remembered all the warnings about predators who gained trust through kindness, and her resolve hardened into protective steel. The confrontation came without warning or diplomacy. Maria emerged from her hiding place like an avenging angel, her voice cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a blade. "Get away from my daughter!" she shouted, causing every bird in the vicinity to scatter in panic. Lily's face crumpled with confusion while Andrew rose from the bench with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The two adults faced each other across a chasm of misunderstanding, while the child they both wanted to protect stood frozen between them. "I don't know what sick game you think you're playing," Maria continued, her voice shaking with fear and fury. "But it ends right now. Lily, come here this instant." The little girl's eyes filled with tears as she looked between her mother and her friend, trying to understand how her two favorite people had suddenly become enemies. Andrew attempted to speak, to explain, but Maria cut him off with verbal razor wire. "Don't you say one word. I know what men like you want from children like mine." The accusations hung in the winter air like poison, transforming the sacred space of their friendship into a battlefield. Andrew felt each word as a physical blow, not because they were true, but because they revealed how his genuine affection for Lily appeared to the outside world. A wealthy businessman befriending a poor child, the optics were indeed troubling when stripped of context and viewed through the lens of a mother's protective terror. His billions and business acumen meant nothing in the face of this primal concern for a child's safety. Lily tried to defend their friendship, to explain how Andrew had helped her with homework, and listened to her stories and never asked for anything wrong or strange. But her protests sounded like the programmed responses of a manipulated child to her mother's traumatized ears. Maria gathered Lily into her arms and retreated toward home, issuing one final warning over her shoulder. "If I see you near my daughter again, I'm calling the police. Stay away from us, or I swear I'll make you regret it." The silence that followed their departure was deafening. Andrew stood alone in the park where he discovered something approaching happiness, feeling the weight of his isolation crash down like an avalanche. The birds gradually returned to their scattered feeding, but the magic that had transformed this ordinary place into something sacred had vanished with Lily's tears. For the first time in months, Andrew felt the full gravity of his loneliness, made more acute by having tasted connection and losing it to circumstances beyond his control. Days passed without any sign of Lily or her mother. Andrew continued his visits to Lincoln Park, hoping against logic that the relationship somehow could be repaired, that Maria might recognize his genuine care for her daughter and allow their friendship to continue. But the bench remained empty, except for sparrows who seemed to sense the absence of their small benefactor. The park felt colder without Lily's presence, as if winter had claimed territory previously protected by her warmth. The social services investigation proceeded with bureaucratic inevitability. Andrew received a formal letter requesting information about his interactions with a minor child in Lincoln Park and advising him to cease all contact pending their inquiry. His lawyers assured him the matter would likely be dismissed once officials realized no wrongdoing had occurred, but the legal process would take months to resolve. Meanwhile, an invisible wall had been erected between Andrew and the one person who had managed to reach through his grief and remind him what it meant to be human. The empty penthouse echoed with memories of conversations he'd shared with Lily about books and dreams and the color of hope. His investment accounts continued generating millions in profits, his cryptocurrency holdings multiplied with market fluctuations, and merger opportunities arrived daily with the promise of even greater wealth. But these victories felt hollow without someone to share them with, someone who cared more about his well-being than his net worth. The clocks in his mansion began stopping again, as if Lily's absence had once more frozen time in his carefully controlled world. Winter deepened into its cruelest phase, with temperatures that made even brief outdoor excursions painful. Andrew's visits to Lincoln Park became exercises in masochistic hope, standing in places where memories had been made, searching for signs that might never come. The city around him pulsed with life and purpose, while he remained trapped in an emotional winter that no amount of money could thaw. He had touched something precious and lost it to fear and misunderstanding, leaving him more isolated than before their paths had crossed. The revelation came in an envelope marked with Maria's careful handwriting, delivered to Andrew's office on a February morning when Chicago lay buried under the season's heaviest snowfall. His assistant placed it on his desk alongside the usual collection of financial reports and business correspondence, but something about the simple white envelope demanded immediate attention. Inside, he found a photograph that made his hands tremble and his breath catch in his throat like a man drowning in memories he'd thought were buried forever. The picture showed his mother as a young woman, maybe 25, standing in front of a small house on Chicago's South Side. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood another woman, obviously pregnant, with kind eyes and the same gentle smile Andrew had learned to love on Lily's face. On the back of the photograph, his mother's handwriting identified the pregnant woman as Elena Santos, my dearest friend, and included a date from 35 years ago. Accompanying the photograph was a birth certificate bearing Lily's full name, Lily Elena Santos, along with a brief letter from Maria that explained everything in language stripped of emotion and filled with painful honesty. Elena had been Andrew's mother's closest friend during her early years in Chicago, when both women were young and struggling to build lives in a city that seemed designed to break spirits. They had worked together, shared dreams and disappointments, and maintained a friendship that endured until Elena's death in a car accident when Lily was just 6 months old. Andrew's mother had never mentioned Elena or her daughter to him, perhaps feeling the grief was too private to share, or maybe protecting secrets she'd promised to keep. But according to Maria's letter, she had quietly financial Lily's care after her friend's death, sending anonymous money orders that helped pay for food and rent and medical bills until the day of her own fatal accident 2 years ago. The checks had stopped coming, leaving Maria to wonder what had happened to her daughter's mysterious benefactor. Reading the letter was like solving a puzzle that had been missing crucial pieces. Andrew finally understood why Lily's presence had felt so familiar, why her wisdom seemed inherited rather than learned, why his mother's photograph had smiled down on their growing friendship with what he'd interpreted as approval. The little girl who'd declared herself part of his destiny was indeed connected to his family's story in ways that transcended coincidence and approached the miraculous. The financial records Maria had included painted a picture of his mother's secret generosity, years of careful assistance that had kept Lily and her mother housed and fed without either woman knowing their benefactor's identity. The amounts weren't large by Andrew's standards, but they represented significant sacrifice for a woman who'd worked multiple jobs just to send her son to college. She had honored her friendship with Elena by caring for the daughter who bore her name, continuing the support until death made such kindness impossible. But the most devastating piece of evidence was a final document, Elena Santos's will, which named Andrew's mother as Lily's godmother and legal guardian in the event of her death. Circumstances and bureaucratic confusion had prevented this arrangement from being formalized, leaving Lily in extended family care until Maria, Elena's niece, could petition for custody. The girl who'd proclaimed herself part of his destiny was, in the most literal sense, family, connected not just by friendship, but by bonds of love and responsibility that stretched back decades. Andrew's grief over his mother's death transformed into something more complex, sorrow mixed with awe at her capacity for quiet heroism. She had been supporting another family while raising her son, had maintained friendships he'd never suspected, had made promises she'd kept in secret until circumstances made them impossible to fulfill. The woman he'd mourned as lost forever had left him one final gift in the form of a little girl who needed what he could provide and offered what he desperately needed in return. The revelation explained everything and changed nothing about his feelings toward Lily. If anything, learning about their connection intensified his desire to honor his mother's memory by protecting and nurturing the child she'd loved. But the legal and social obstacles remained formidable. Maria's suspicions hadn't vanished with the truth, and social services continued their investigation into what they perceived as an inappropriate relationship between an adult male and an unrelated minor child. That evening, Andrew sat in his penthouse office surrounded by documents that told the story of two mothers' friendship and their children's unexpected intersection. The photograph of his mother and Elena seemed to glow in the lamplight, two young women full of hope and dreams, unaware that their lives would become tragically brief, but their love would create bonds spanning generations. Outside his windows, Chicago sparkled under fresh snow, beautiful and cold, as the truth that had finally emerged from decades of secrets. The approaching storm seemed both inevitable and potentially devastating. Andrew possessed the financial resources to fight any legal challenges, to hire attorneys who could navigate the complex family court system, but money couldn't repair the damage that had been done to his relationship with Lily. The little girl who'd brought light into his darkness remained locked away by circumstances that turned his genuine affection into something that appeared suspect and dangerous. He was rich beyond measure, but powerless to reclaim the connection that had given his life meaning. Yet, something in the evening air whispered of possibilities beyond his current understanding. The truth had emerged from hiding after 35 years of secrecy, suggesting that other miracles might be waiting in the shadows. Andrew studied the photograph one more time, noting how his mother's eyes seemed to hold secrets and promises, as if she'd known this moment would come and had prepared for it in ways he was only beginning to comprehend. The March wind carried hints of coming spring as Andrew made his way through the familiar paths of Lincoln Park, but the bench where he and Lily had shared so many conversations remained empty. Months had passed since their forced separation, months during which his legal team had worked to resolve the social services investigation, while he'd struggled with loneliness that seemed to deepen with each passing day. The revelation of his family's connection to Lily had changed everything and nothing. He now understood the source of their bond, but remained powerless to restore what had been broken. His investments had continued performing brilliantly during his absence from active management. Cryptocurrency portfolios had surged with the spring market rally, renewable energy stocks had split again, and his venture capital funds had identified another unicorn startup worth billions. The numbers on his monthly statements were staggering even by his elevated standards, yet Andrew barely glanced at them. Wealth had become meaningless without someone to share it with, without a child whose eyes lit up when he explained compound interest using cookie metaphors. The social services case had been officially closed weeks ago, when investigators finally accepted the evidence of his family's historical connection to Lily and Maria. Character witnesses from his business community testified to his integrity, while financial records proved his mother's years of anonymous support for the Santos family. Yet, vindication in the legal system hadn't translated to forgiveness in Maria's heart. She remained convinced that wealthy men were dangerous by definition, that Andrew's interest in her daughter must hide predatory intentions regardless of family connections or professional testimonials. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the family counselor assigned to their case, had attempted to mediate between Andrew and Maria without success. During supervised meetings that felt more like depositions than conversations, Maria's hostility remained impermeable to reason or evidence. She acknowledged the family connection, but questioned Andrew's motives, suggesting he was trying to fulfill some psychological need at her daughter's expense. Her protective love had crystallized into suspicion that nothing could dissolve. Meanwhile, Lily struggled with confusion and sadness that broke Andrew's heart during their brief, supervised encounters. The little girl couldn't understand why her friend had suddenly become forbidden, why conversations that had brought them both joy were now monitored by social workers who took notes on every interaction. Her natural enthusiasm had dimmed like a flower deprived of sunlight. And Andrew watched helplessly as the spark that had first drawn him to her began to fade under the pressure of adult fears and institutional oversight. The irony wasn't lost on him that his billions were useless against the simple human problem of earned trust. He could buy companies, manipulate markets, and influence governments, but he couldn't purchase Maria's confidence or erase her fears about his intentions toward her daughter. Money had isolated him so completely from normal human relationships that he'd forgotten how to navigate basic social connections without the protective barrier of wealthy privilege. Spring afternoons found him returning repeatedly to their old meeting place, sitting alone on the bench where they'd shared stories and fed sparrows. Other park visitors recognized him now, the sad man in expensive clothes who sat by himself watching children play on distant swings. Some probably wondered about his story, but none approached. His grief had become visible, transforming him into someone others instinctively avoided, as if loneliness might be contagious. The turning point came with devastating suddenness on an April evening when Andrew's phone rang with a call that shattered what remained of his carefully controlled world. Maria's voice was barely recognizable through tears and panic. "She's sick. Lily is really sick, and the doctors say I need to bring her to the hospital right now. I don't know what to do. I don't have insurance that covers this kind of emergency, and they're talking about treatments that cost more money than I'll ever have." The conversation that followed revealed the full extent of Lily's condition, a rare blood disorder that had been developing slowly for months, masked by her natural resilience and her family's inability to afford regular medical care. What had appeared to be ordinary childhood fatigue was actually a failing immune system that required immediate, expensive intervention. The treatments she needed were available at Chicago's best children's hospital, but the costs would bankrupt any normal family and exceed even the most generous insurance coverage. Andrew's response was immediate and unquestioning. "Bring her to Northwestern Memorial right now. I'll meet you there and handle everything. Don't worry about money or insurance or permissions. Just get her the help she needs." His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems with resources and determination, but underneath lay terror at the possibility of losing the little girl who had become the center of his emotional universe. The hospital's pediatric wing was a place where miracles and tragedies unfolded with equal frequency, where families faced their deepest fears under fluorescent lighting that never dimmed. Andrew arrived before the ambulance, using his connections to ensure Lily would receive the finest care available. His name opened doors and commanded attention from department heads who normally dealt with insurance companies rather than individuals. Within an hour, a team of specialists had been assembled, treatment rooms prepared, and every resource of the hospital mobilized for one sick little girl. Maria arrived clutching Lily's small hand, her face etched with a fear that transcended their previous conflicts. In the face of her daughter's illness, old suspicions seemed petty and irrelevant. When she saw Andrew waiting in the emergency room, she didn't recoil or issue warnings. Instead, she simply said, "Please help her. I don't care about anything else anymore. Just, please help my baby get better." The words dissolved months of distrust and revealed the fundamental truth that both adults loved the same child and would do anything to ensure her survival. The next several days blurred together in a haze of medical consultations, treatment options, and waiting room vigils. Andrew discovered that all his wealth meant nothing if it couldn't cure a little girl who meant everything to him. Bills that would have destroyed most families were simply absorbed into his accounts, but money couldn't heal damaged blood cells or reverse genetic disorders. He learned to speak the language of medical uncertainty, to hope for percentage improvements and celebrate small victories like stable vital signs and successful medication responses. Maria's gratitude gradually replaced her suspicion as she watched Andrew's genuine anguish over Lily's condition. He slept in hospital chairs, provided meals for exhausted staff, and maintained hope when medical updates offered little encouragement. His love for her daughter was obvious to everyone in the pediatric ward. Nurses, doctors, and social workers who'd initially been skeptical of his involvement now saw clearly that his concern was real and his intentions purely altruistic. Lily herself seemed to understand that something fundamental had shifted between the adults in her life. Despite her physical weakness, she maintained the emotional wisdom that had first drawn Andrew to her, comforting her mother's tears and thanking him for staying close during the scariest moments. "I told you we were part of each other's destiny," she whispered during one of her more alert moments, and Andrew realized she'd been right in ways none of them could have predicted. The specialists delivered their final prognosis with the careful optimism doctors reserved for cases where recovery was possible, but not guaranteed. Lily's condition was serious but treatable with consistent care, expensive medications, and regular monitoring that would continue for years. The financial burden would be staggering for any normal family, but manageable within Andrew's vast resources. More importantly, her chances for a normal life were excellent if she received the proper treatment and care. That evening, as Lily slept peacefully under the influence of medications that were already showing positive results, Andrew and Maria sat together in the hospital cafeteria, having their first real conversation since the crisis in Lincoln Park. The fluorescent lighting wasn't kind to either of them. Maria looked exhausted from weeks of worry, while Andrew seemed older than his years, aged by the fear of losing someone he'd come to love like family. "I owe you an apology," Maria began, her voice quiet but clear. "I was so afraid of losing her to someone who might hurt her that I nearly lost her to something that could kill her. You saved my daughter's life, and I spent months treating you like a criminal. I don't know how to make up for that kind of mistake." Her words carried the weight of genuine remorse and the recognition that her protective instincts had almost proven disastrously wrong. Andrew's response surprised them both with its grace and understanding. "You don't owe me anything except the chance to continue loving Lily like family, because that's what she is. Family connected by friendship and fate and a little girl's wisdom about destiny. Your job is to protect her, and you did that perfectly. Now, maybe we can protect her together." The conversation that followed revealed their shared commitment to Lily's well-being and their mutual recognition that some gifts come disguised as challenges. The transformation that followed Lily's recovery exceeded even Andrew's optimistic projections. His penthouse, empty for so long except for echoes and regret, began filling with the sounds of life and purpose. Lily's frequent visits brought laughter that had been absent for years, while Maria's presence added the warmth of genuine friendship based on shared devotion to her daughter's happiness. The mansion's clocks resumed keeping time, as if the building itself had awakened from a long sleep. Andrew's approach to business evolved as dramatically as his personal relationships. Board meetings that had once consumed entire days were streamlined to accommodate school pickup schedules and homework assistance sessions. His investment strategies, while still profitable, were increasingly focused on companies that serve children and families rather than purely maximizing returns. He established a foundation dedicated to supporting single mothers and children with medical challenges, using his financial expertise to create sustainable funding that would outlast his own lifetime. The park bench, where their friendship had begun, became a regular meeting place once again, but now Maria often joined them for these sessions. Lily delighted in having her two favorite adults together, orchestrating conversations between them and mediating their different perspectives with the diplomatic skills of someone who'd learned to navigate between worlds. The Sparrows returned as well, as if recognizing that their small benefactor had emerged from her medical crisis with her generous spirit intact. Media attention occasionally focused on their unusual family arrangement, a billionaire who'd found purpose through friendship with a sick child and her struggling mother. Business magazines wrote articles about Andrew's transformed management style, while charity organizations studied his foundation's innovative approaches to sustainable giving. Yet Andrew avoided publicity whenever possible, preferring privacy that protected Lily from unwanted attention and allowed their relationship to develop naturally. The hospital visits continued regularly, but now they were routine checkups rather than crisis interventions. Dr. Patricia Williams, Lily's primary oncologist, marveled at her patient's progress and credited not just the expensive medications, but the support system that surrounded the little girl with unconditional love. "Children heal better when they feel safe and cherished," she explained to Andrew during one appointment. "Lily has both in abundance, and it shows in every test result." Educational opportunities that had been impossible on Maria's limited income became readily available through Andrew's resources. Lily was enrolled in one of Chicago's finest private schools, where small class sizes and individual attention helped her catch up academically while accommodating the medical appointments that remained part of her regular schedule. Her natural intelligence, no longer hindered by inadequate resources, flourished in an environment designed to nurture curious minds. The little girl's wisdom continued to astound adults who assumed children her age possessed limited understanding of complex subjects. During family dinners at Andrew's penthouse, she would offer observations about kindness and forgiveness that left both adults contemplating their own assumptions about faith and human nature. "Sometimes angels look like sick kids," she told Andrew one evening, "because that's when people pay the most attention to them." Financial security transformed Maria's daily existence from survival to planning for the future. Her exhausting schedule of multiple jobs gave way to part-time work that allowed her to spend more time with Lily while completing the education she'd abandoned years earlier. Andrew's quiet support enabled her to pursue nursing school, fulfilling a dream she'd shelved when circumstances demanded immediate income rather than long-term investment in her potential. Their unconventional family unit attracted some criticism from people who suspected ulterior motives or inappropriate relationships. Conservative voices questioned a wealthy single man's involvement with a poor mother and her daughter, while others suggested the arrangement was somehow unhealthy for all parties involved. But their happiness was too obvious to ignore, and supporters far outnumbered critics among those who knew them personally. The foundation grew steadily under Andrew's guidance, eventually becoming one of the city's most effective charitable organizations. Unlike traditional philanthropy that relied on annual galas and tax-motivated donations, this foundation operated with the efficiency of a business and the heart of a family committed to addressing real problems with practical solutions. Lily served as its unofficial mascot, reminding board members that their work had faces and names and futures that could be dramatically improved through sustained attention. Years accumulated like compound interest, each season bringing new developments in their shared life. Andrew aged more gracefully than he had since his mother's death, finding that purpose and love were better anti-aging treatments than expensive skin care or personal trainers. Maria completed her nursing degree and began working at the same children's hospital where Lily had been treated, helping other families navigate medical crises with expertise born from personal experience. Lily grew from a wise child into an even wiser adolescent, her experience with illness and recovery providing perspective that few teenagers possessed. Her medical condition remained stable, requiring ongoing monitoring, but no longer dominating their daily routines. She excelled academically and socially, surrounded by friends who knew nothing of her family's unusual circumstances and cared only that she was kind, funny, and loyal. The mansion's rooms that had once echoed with emptiness now served various purposes. Maria's study, where she completed homework assignments, Lily's art studio, where creativity flourished under skylights Andrew had installed specifically for her projects, guest rooms that accommodated extended family members who'd initially been suspicious of their arrangement, but gradually accepted its obvious benefits. The building had become a home rather than a museum, filled with the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Andrew's business empire continued expanding, but now growth was measured not just in profits, but in positive impact on employees, communities, and causes that aligned with his evolved values. His investment strategies favored companies with strong environmental records and progressive employee policies, proving that financial success and social responsibility could coexist profitably. Shareholders complained occasionally about his reduced focus on short-term gains, but long-term results validated his transformed approach to wealth creation. The park bench where their story had begun was eventually dedicated with a small brass plaque reading, "For friendship that changes everything," a recognition that some loves transcend traditional categories and create families from the most unlikely connections. Tourists occasionally asked about its significance, but locals who'd witnessed their weekly gatherings over the years simply smiled and suggested they sit there for a while. Observing how the sparrows seemed particularly friendly, and the sunlight fell just right for contemplation. Evening light filtered through the windows of Andrew's penthouse office as he reviewed the Foundation's annual report, noting with satisfaction that their programs had helped thousands of families over the past decade. At 62, he moved more slowly, but thought more clearly, his priorities refined by years of understanding what truly mattered. The financial statements on his desk showed continued prosperity, but the photographs scattered among them told the real story of his wealth. Images of graduations and celebrations, quiet moments and shared adventures that money couldn't buy, but love had provided in abundance. Lily, now 17 and preparing for college, had grown into the teacher she'd dreamed of becoming as a child. Her academic achievements were impressive, but Andrew was more proud of her character, the way she volunteered at the hospital where she'd been treated, how she mentored younger students struggling with medical challenges, her natural ability to help others find hope in difficult circumstances. She possessed her mother's strength and her godmother's wisdom, tempered by experiences that had taught her to value every healthy day as a gift rather than an expectation. Maria had become not just family, but one of Andrew's closest confidants, someone who could challenge his assumptions and celebrate his victories with equal honesty. Her career in pediatric nursing fulfilled both her professional aspirations and her desire to help families facing the same fears she'd once confronted alone. Their friendship had evolved from crisis-forged cooperation into genuine affection based on shared values and complementary strengths. The foundation they'd built together was preparing to outlive all of them, structured with endowments that would continue funding programs long after current leadership transitioned to future generations. Andrew took particular pride in financial architecture that would provide sustainable assistance rather than temporary relief, reflecting lessons learned from watching families struggle with recurring challenges that required long-term solutions rather than short-term charity. Medical checkups remained routine parts of their schedule, but Dr. Williams consistently delivered positive reports about Lily's continued health. The treatments that had once seemed miraculous were now simply part of the pharmaceutical arsenal that enabled children with her condition to live normal lives. Technology continued advancing, promising even better outcomes for future patients who would benefit from research funded partly by foundation grants. Chicago had changed around them during their years together, but Lincoln Park remained a constant in their evolving story. The bench where they'd first met was now weathered by seasons and use, surrounded by mature trees that had grown taller while providing shade for countless other conversations between people discovering unexpected connections. The sparrows were different birds now, but their descendants maintained the same fearless approach to accepting offered food from gentle hands. Summer evenings on the penthouse terrace provided opportunities for reflection about the journey that had brought them together and the future that stretched ahead with promise rather than dread. Andrew no longer feared loneliness because he'd learned that love multiplied when shared, that investing in relationships provided returns that compound exponentially over time. His mother's legacy lived on through Lily's continued thriving, and through the countless other children whose lives had been improved by resources deployed with wisdom rather than mere generosity. The city sparkled below them as they shared dinner on the terrace, their conversation ranging across topics that had become familiar through repetition, but remained fascinating because of the different perspectives each person brought to every discussion. Lily talked about college plans that included studying education and psychology, preparing for a career helping children with chronic medical conditions achieve their academic potential. Maria described new treatment protocols she was learning at the hospital, innovations that would help future families navigate medical crises with less fear and better outcomes. Andrew listened with the contentment of someone who'd discovered that wealth's greatest value lay not in acquisition, but in deployment for purposes larger than personal comfort. His investment portfolios continued generating impressive returns, but those numbers seemed less important than the knowledge that his resources were creating opportunities and solving problems that would otherwise remain unaddressed. The Foundation's impact reports provided satisfaction that no quarterly earnings statement could match. Their conversation gradually focused on memories they'd accumulated together. Christmas mornings in the mansion, vacation trips to places Lily had only read about in books, quiet moments during medical appointments when hope seemed fragile but never disappeared entirely. These shared experiences had woven them into a family unit that defied conventional categories but provided everything traditional families were supposed to offer: love, security, encouragement, and the unshakable knowledge that someone cared about your well-being above their own convenience. As stars became visible in the darkening sky, Andrew reflected on the mysterious forces that had brought them together at exactly the moment each of them needed what the others could provide. Lily's illness had created urgency that dissolved artificial barriers between them, while his resources had enabled her survival and recovery. Maria's initial suspicion had protected her daughter until circumstances proved his intentions were genuinely altruistic, and her eventual trust had created space for love to flourish. The evening breeze carried scents of approaching autumn, reminding them that another school year was about to begin with all its familiar rhythms and expectations. Lily would start her senior year with college applications and scholarship opportunities that would determine her next chapter, while Maria would begin supervisory responsibilities at the hospital that reflected her growing expertise and leadership capabilities. Andrew would continue balancing business obligations with family priorities, maintaining the integration he'd achieved between professional success and personal fulfillment. Their story had become part of Chicago's quiet mythology, the billionaire and the sick child whose friendship had transformed all their lives in ways that validated faith in unlikely miracles. Visitors to Lincoln Park occasionally heard versions of their tale from longtime residents who'd witnessed their weekly meetings and gradual evolution into something resembling a traditional extended family. The details varied with each telling, but the essential truth remained consistent. Sometimes love appears in forms we don't recognize and changes everything we thought we knew about what family means. As they prepared to end another evening together, Lily offered one of her characteristic observations that seemed to capture profound truth in simple language. "I'm glad I was sick when I met you, because healthy kids probably wouldn't have made you pay attention long enough to become family." Her words carried the weight of accumulated wisdom and the lightness of someone who'd learned to find gifts hidden within challenges that initially appeared to be purely destructive. The months passed with increasing velocity, as if time itself had become eager to deliver the next chapters of their intertwined story. Lily's college applications reflected not just academic excellence, but a depth of character that admission counselors found remarkable in someone so young. Her personal essays described learning about love through illness, about finding family in unexpected places, about understanding that wealth meant nothing without someone to share it with. Northwestern University offered her a full scholarship, a gesture that seemed to complete some cosmic circle, bringing her to the same institution where Andrew had once studied business before building his empire. The Foundation's work expanded internationally, with programs now operating in 12 countries and helping thousands of families navigate medical crises that would have been insurmountable without institutional support. Medical schools began studying their model of comprehensive care that addressed not just patient needs, but family stability, recognizing that children recovered more quickly when their parents weren't destroyed by financial stress. Andrew found himself invited to speak at conferences around the world, sharing insights about philanthropy that prioritized dignity and sustainability over simple charity. Maria's expertise in pediatric nursing had earned recognition within the medical community, and she was frequently consulted on cases involving children from challenging socioeconomic circumstances. Her ability to bridge the gap between medical necessity and family resources made her invaluable to hospital administrators who struggled with the ethical implications of expensive treatments that patients couldn't afford. She'd become an advocate not just for individual children, but for systematic changes that would make quality healthcare more accessible to families everywhere. The seasons cycled through their familiar patterns, each bringing its own celebrations and milestones. Lily's 18th birthday was marked not with typical teenage extravagance, but with a party at the Children's Hospital, where young patients received gifts and attention from someone who understood their fears and could offer genuine hope based on personal experience. The joy on those little faces reminded everyone present why their unconventional family had been necessary, to create ripples of healing that extended far beyond their own immediate happiness. Andrew's business practices continued evolving toward greater social responsibility, inspiring other wealthy individuals to consider how their resources might be deployed for maximum positive impact rather than simply maximum profit. Forbes features and Harvard Business School case studies examined his transition from traditional capitalism to what economists began calling purpose-driven investment strategies. Yet Andrew remained more interested in results than recognition, measuring success by lives improved rather than articles written about his transformed priorities. The park where their friendship had begun underwent subtle changes as Lincoln Park itself evolved with Chicago's growth. New walking paths were added, playground equipment was updated, and the surrounding neighborhood gentrified in ways that brought both improvements and concerns about longtime residents being displaced. Through all these changes, their bench remained constant, a weathered wooden monument to the power of unexpected connections to reshape lives in ways no one could have predicted or planned. College preparation consumed much of Lily's senior year, but she insisted on maintaining her volunteer work at the hospital and her weekly park visits with Andrew. These routines had become sacred to all of them, providing stability and continuity amid the changes that accompany growing up and growing older. Maria documented these moments with photographs that would eventually fill multiple albums, creating visual records of a family that existed outside traditional categories, but embodied everything families aspired to represent. The application essays Lily wrote for various universities revealed sophisticated thinking about destiny, purpose, and the responsibility that comes with surviving challenges that defeat others. Her writing possessed the kind of wisdom that usually took decades to develop, reflecting experiences that had compressed a lifetime of learning into a few transformative years. Admissions officers who read her applications often commented privately that they'd never encountered a teenager with such profound understanding of what truly mattered in life. Spring brought acceptance letters from every university where Lily had applied, along with scholarship offers that recognized both her academic achievements and her character. The decision process involved long family discussions about which opportunities would best prepare her for the teaching career she'd dreamed of since childhood. Eventually, she chose Northwestern, not because Andrew had attended there, but because their education program specifically focused on working with children facing medical and social challenges. The foundation's annual gala had grown into one of Chicago's most significant charity events, but Andrew insisted it remain focused on storytelling rather than simple fundraising. Each year, families who'd been helped by foundation programs shared their experiences, creating emotional connections between donors and recipients that transformed abstract compassion into personal commitment. Lily often served as a keynote speaker at these events, describing her journey from sick child to college-bound student with a clarity and grace that left audiences both inspired and humbled. Summer before college was filled with preparation and anticipation, but also with the bitter sweetness of knowing their daily routines would soon change dramatically. Lily would remain in Chicago for university, but dormitory life would alter the rhythms they had established over years of shared dinners and homework sessions and evening conversations about dreams and fears. The approaching transition represented growth and opportunity, but also the natural evolution of relationships that had served their original purposes and now needed to adapt to new circumstances. August brought freshman orientation and the emotional complexity of watching someone you love take their next steps toward independence. Andrew helped carry boxes into Lily's dormitory room, remembering his own college arrival decades earlier when his mother had insisted on personally folding clothes into drawers despite his embarrassment. The cycle of generations continued, but with the added dimension of chosen family bonds that were no less powerful than biological connections. If anything, relationships forged through crisis and maintained through choice carried special significance because they existed purely through love rather than obligation. The first semester of college proved that Lily was ready for academic challenges while remaining committed to the values that had shaped her character. Her professors noted exceptional maturity in classroom discussions about educational philosophy and child development, recognizing someone who understood theoretical concepts through lived experience. She joined student organizations focused on hospital volunteering and mentoring younger students, immediately becoming a leader among peers who admired her wisdom and authenticity. Maria's career continued advancing as her expertise became increasingly recognized within the medical community. She was promoted to senior pediatric nurse practitioner and began developing training programs for other healthcare workers who needed to understand the family dynamics surrounding childhood illness. Her work bridged medical treatment and social support in ways that improved outcomes for countless patients whose recovery depended not just on clinical care, but on emotional stability and family cohesion. The holiday season brought their extended family together in ways that had become traditional, though the traditions themselves were only a few years old. Christmas morning at Andrew's penthouse included not just their immediate household, but also friends from the hospital, other families who'd been helped by the foundation, and anyone who might otherwise spend the holiday alone. These celebrations embodied the principle that family could be created through choice and maintained through love, regardless of blood relations or legal documents. Andrew's health remained robust despite his advancing age, perhaps because purpose and love had proven more effective than any medical intervention at maintaining vitality. His annual physical exams showed the kind of results that impressed doctors who were accustomed to treating wealthy patients whose stress levels remained high despite their financial security. The transformation from isolated billionaire to engaged family man had produced measurable improvements in every aspect of his well-being. The Foundation's research initiatives began yielding significant breakthroughs in treating childhood blood disorders, with several pharmaceutical companies licensing patents developed through Foundation-funded projects. These innovations would help future children with conditions similar to Lily's, creating a legacy that extended the impact of their personal story into broader medical advancement. Andrew took particular pride in knowing that their family's crisis had contributed to solutions that would spare other families from experiencing similar fears. Spring of Lily's freshman year brought another milestone when Maria defended her master's thesis in nursing, completing the education she'd begun years earlier, but finishing with insights shaped by personal experience and professional growth. Her research focused on family-centered care models that address psychological as well as medical needs of pediatric patients. The thesis was later published in several medical journals and became required reading in nursing schools across the country. The park visits continued despite everyone's busy schedules, though now they often included Maria's nursing colleagues or Lily's university friends who'd been drawn into their unconventional family circle. The bench that had witnessed the beginning of their friendship now hosted a rotating collection of people who'd been touched by their story and wanted to understand how strangers had become family through shared crisis and sustained commitment. These conversations often inspired others to examine their own relationships and consider how love might appear in unexpected forms. Summer internships provided Lily with practical experience in educational settings that served children with special needs, cementing her commitment to the teaching career she'd envisioned since childhood. Her supervisors consistently praised her natural ability to connect with students who felt different or isolated, recognizing someone who understood from personal experience how encouragement and support could transform lives. Reports from her internship placements read like testimonials to the power of lived experience to inform professional competence. The Foundation's global expansion reached a significant milestone when international programs began operating independently in several countries, sustained by local funding and leadership, but following models developed through Chicago-based research and innovation. Medical conferences now featured presentations about the Dawson model of comprehensive family-centered care, recognizing the systematic approach to addressing childhood illness that had emerged from Andrew and Lily's personal experience. Evening conversations on the penthouse terrace increasingly focused on legacy and continuity, ensuring that programs they'd created would survive changes in leadership and funding. Andrew was developing succession plans that would maintain the Foundation's mission while allowing for growth and adaptation to new challenges. These discussions revealed his evolution from someone who'd once measured success purely through accumulated wealth to someone whose primary concern was sustainable impact on problems that would outlast his own lifetime. The autumn of Lily's sophomore year brought significant developments in her academic program, including recognition as an outstanding student in educational psychology and selection for advanced research opportunities studying childhood resilience. Her professors noted exceptional insight in analyzing how children process trauma and recovery, drawing connections between theoretical frameworks and practical applications that reflected both intellectual ability and personal wisdom. Maria's innovations in pediatric care had attracted attention from healthcare systems nationwide, leading to consulting opportunities that would help hospitals improve their approaches to family-centered treatment. Her expertise had become a valuable resource for medical institutions struggling to balance clinical excellence with compassionate care in environments dominated by insurance limitations and bureaucratic constraints. Speaking engagements took her across the country, but she maintained her base in Chicago to preserve the family connections that had become central to her identity. The December evening when Andrew announced his decision to establish an endowed chair in pediatric education at Northwestern University, recognizing Lily's commitment to teaching children with special needs, the conversation took place on the familiar terrace overlooking Chicago's glittering skyline. His gift would ensure that future teachers received specialized training in working with children facing medical challenges, creating a permanent institutional legacy that would multiply Lily's impact far beyond what any individual teacher could accomplish alone. Winter brought another health scare when Andrew experienced chest pains that required immediate medical attention, though tests revealed nothing more serious than stress-related symptoms that responded well to rest and adjustments in his schedule. The incident reminded everyone that time remained finite despite their happiness, spurring conversations about priorities and the importance of appreciating present moments rather than assuming infinite futures. Lily's response to the crisis, immediate, calm, and focused on practical support, demonstrated how completely she'd internalized lessons about facing uncertainty with courage and grace. The Foundation's annual report documented remarkable growth in programs serving families affected by childhood illness, with statistical outcomes that validated theoretical approaches developed through their experiential learning. Scholarly articles analyzing their model appeared in medical journals, education publications, and social work literature, establishing academic credibility for methods that had emerged organically from personal necessity rather than theoretical research. Spring semester brought news that Lily had been selected for a prestigious summer fellowship studying educational approaches for children with chronic medical conditions, an opportunity that would take her to hospitals and schools across Europe for 2 months of intensive research and observation. The fellowship represented recognition of her academic achievement and professional potential, but also validation that personal experience combined with formal education could produce expertise valuable to institutions worldwide. The farewell dinner before Lily's departure for Europe became an occasion for reflection on how far they'd all traveled since that cold afternoon in Lincoln Park, when an 8-year-old girl had announced herself part of a billionaire's destiny. The conversation ranged across memories they'd created together and dreams they still hoped to fulfill, acknowledging changes that growth required while celebrating constants that love had preserved. Andrew's toast to family chosen by fate and maintained by choice captured the essential truth of relationships that existed outside traditional categories, but embodied everything family was supposed to provide. The postcards and emails Lily sent during her European fellowship revealed continued development of someone whose personal experience had prepared her to understand childhood illness from perspectives that formal education alone could never provide. Her observations about different healthcare systems and educational approaches reflected sophisticated analysis informed by both academic training and lived experience. Hospital administrators in London, pediatric specialists in Vienna, and education researchers in Stockholm all commented on her remarkable insight into connections between medical treatment and educational support. Andrew used Lily's absence to focus on business transitions that would gradually reduce his direct involvement in daily operations while maintaining strategic oversight of foundations and investment portfolios. His management team had long ago adapted to his evolved priorities, accepting that family commitments and philanthropic responsibilities took precedence over purely profit-driven activities. The company's performance had actually improved under this approach, suggesting that purpose-driven leadership might produce better results than single-minded focus on financial returns. Maria's summer was consumed with developing training curricula for pediatric nursing programs, drawing on years of experience helping families navigate medical crises. Her work aimed to prepare healthcare professionals not just for clinical competence, but for emotional intelligence necessary to support families facing their worst fears. The curricula she developed would eventually be adopted by nursing schools nationwide, multiplying her impact far beyond individual patient encounters. The reunion when Lily returned from Europe brought news of her engagement in graduate research that would extend her fellowship work into a master's thesis examining cultural differences in supporting children with chronic medical conditions. Her academic advisor praised not just her intellectual capacity, but her unique ability to synthesize theoretical knowledge with practical understanding, creating scholarly work that would contribute meaningfully to both educational theory and clinical practice. Autumn brought celebration when Maria was offered a position as Director of Family Services at Northwestern Memorial Hospital's pediatric wing, the same facility where Lily had been treated years earlier. The appointment represented not just career advancement but symbolic completion of a journey from desperate mother to healthcare leader whose expertise would help countless other families facing similar crises. Her acceptance speech at the hospital's annual donor dinner acknowledged how personal experience had informed professional development in ways that created authentic empathy and practical wisdom. The Foundation's impact continued expanding through partnerships with medical schools, education programs, and healthcare systems that adopted comprehensive approaches to childhood illness. Research funded through Foundation grants was yielding pharmaceutical breakthroughs and therapeutic innovations that improved outcomes for children with conditions once considered untreatable. Awards and recognitions accumulated, but Andrew remained most proud of individual success stories, letters from parents whose children were thriving because comprehensive support had enabled families to remain stable during medical crises. Evening discussions increasingly focused on ensuring continuity of values and programs beyond current leadership, acknowledging that institutions needed to evolve while preserving essential missions. Andrew's estate planning involved complex arrangements that would provide sustainable funding while preventing future generations from undermining foundations built on principles of dignity, comprehensive care, and recognition that families needed support systems extending far beyond medical treatment. The winter evening when Lily announced her acceptance to a doctoral program in educational psychology with specialization in childhood medical trauma marked another milestone in her development from sick child to emerging expert in helping others navigate similar challenges. Her research proposal examined connections between family stability and recovery outcomes, drawing on personal experience and scholarly analysis to develop theoretical frameworks that could improve support systems for children facing serious illness. Andrew's 70th birthday celebration took place not in expensive restaurants or exotic locations, but in the pediatric wing where Lily had been treated, surrounded by families who'd been helped by foundation programs and medical professionals whose work had been supported by comprehensive care initiatives. The evening embodied principles that had emerged from their journey together, that true wealth was measured in relationships rather than possessions, that success meant creating opportunities for others rather than simply accumulating advantages for oneself. The speech Lily gave at Andrew's birthday party captured truths that academic training alone could never have taught her. 7 years ago, I told a stranger in the park that I was part of his destiny, not knowing that he would become part of mine in ways that would save my life and shape everything I hope to become. We discovered that family doesn't require blood relations or legal documents. It requires only commitment to each other's welfare and willingness to love without conditions or expectations. Her words brought tears to audiences who understood they were witnessing bonds that transcended conventional categories while embodying everything human relationships aspired to represent. The spring when Maria completed her doctorate in nursing with a dissertation examining family-centered approaches to pediatric care. The ceremony took place in the same auditorium where Andrew had received his MBA decades earlier. The circular nature of their story, connections spanning generations and institutions, seemed to validate beliefs about destiny and purpose that had sustained them through challenges and changes. Maria's academic achievement represented not just personal accomplishment, but vindication of approaches to healthcare that prioritize dignity and comprehensive support over purely medical interventions. The Foundation's 10th anniversary gala featured presentation of research outcomes that had emerged from programs originally designed to help individual families, but had evolved into systematic approaches to childhood illness that were changing healthcare delivery nationwide. Statistical reports documented thousands of families who'd received support, hundreds of medical professionals who'd received specialized training, and dozens of pharmaceutical innovations funded through research grants. Yet, the most powerful presentations remained personal testimonies from children and parents whose lives had been transformed by comprehensive care that addressed medical, educational, emotional, and financial needs simultaneously. Summer brought another transition when Lily completed her master's degree and accepted a teaching position at a specialized school serving children with chronic medical conditions. Her first classroom would include students facing challenges similar to those she'd experienced, creating opportunities to apply theoretical knowledge gained through academic study to practical problems she understood from personal experience. The symmetry seemed perfect. The sick child had become the teacher she'd dreamed of being, prepared to help others navigate difficulties she'd successfully overcome. The evening before Lily's first day as a teacher, the three of them sat on the familiar park bench where their friendship had begun, watching sparrows gather for their daily feeding while reflecting on journeys that had brought them from crisis to purpose, from isolation to connection, from fear to hope. The conversation touched on memories they'd created together and dreams they still hoped to fulfill, acknowledging growth that required change while celebrating constants that love had preserved. Andrew's reflection on their years together revealed profound transformation from someone who'd measured success purely through accumulated wealth to someone whose primary satisfaction came from relationships and positive impact on problems larger than his own comfort. His investment portfolios continued generating impressive returns, but those numbers seemed less important than knowledge that resources were creating opportunities and solving problems that would otherwise remain unaddressed. The Foundation's impact reports provided satisfaction that no quarterly earnings statement could match. The beginning of Lily's teaching career represented not just personal accomplishment, but validation of beliefs about resilience and purpose that had sustained their unconventional family through challenges and changes. Her first classroom was filled with children facing medical challenges she understood from personal experience, creating opportunities to provide encouragement and support that went far beyond academic instruction. Parents of her students consistently praised her exceptional ability to understand their fears and offer realistic hope based on successful navigation of similar difficulties. The autumn when Andrew quietly stepped back from daily business operations to focus on philanthropic work full-time, the transition represented completion of his evolution from traditional capitalist to purpose-driven philanthropist, whose primary concern was sustainable impact on problems that would outlast his own lifetime. Board meetings that had once consumed entire days were replaced by visits to hospitals and schools, where foundation programs were operating, providing direct observation of outcomes that validated theoretical approaches developed through personal experience. The December evening when they announced Lily's engagement to her research partner from graduate school, someone who shared her commitment to helping children with medical challenges achieve their potential. The celebration took place on the familiar penthouse terrace with views of Lincoln Park where their friendship had begun. The conversation touched on changes that marriage would bring while acknowledging bonds that would endure regardless of new relationships and responsibilities. Maria's appointment to the hospital's board of directors represented recognition of expertise developed through personal crisis, professional education, and years of helping other families navigate medical emergencies. Her voice in policy discussions ensured that family-centered care principles remained priorities even when financial pressures suggested more expedient approaches. Speaking engagements took her across the country, sharing insights about comprehensive support systems that addressed psychological and social needs in addition to medical treatment. The Foundation's expansion into international programs reached significant milestones when comprehensive care models developed through Chicago-based experience were adapted for healthcare systems in developing countries where resources were limited, but family-centered approaches proved even more essential. Medical conferences featured presentations about interventions that improved outcomes while reducing costs, demonstrating that compassionate care could be economically sustainable when properly implemented. The spring when Lily completed her doctoral coursework and began dissertation research examining connections between family stability and recovery outcomes in children with chronic illnesses, her work represented synthesis of personal experience, professional education, and scholarly analysis that would contribute meaningfully to both theoretical understanding and practical applications. University libraries acquired her published articles, ensuring that insights gained through their family's journey would influence future healthcare professionals and policy makers. The wedding celebration took place in the hospital chapel, where Lily had prayed during her illness, surrounded by medical professionals who'd supported her recovery and foundation staff who'd helped create programs benefiting thousands of other families. Andrew's role as father figure in the ceremony acknowledged chosen family bonds that were no less meaningful than biological relationships. His wedding gift, establishment of a pediatric research center in Lily's name, ensured permanent institutional recognition of her contributions to understanding childhood resilience and recovery. The evening after the wedding, as they shared quiet conversation on the penthouse terrace, the three of them reflected on transformation from crisis to purpose, from isolation to connection, from wealth without meaning to resources deployed for sustainable positive impact. Chicago sparkled below them exactly as it had during their first dinner together, but everything had changed in ways that validated beliefs about love, destiny, and the responsibility that comes with surviving challenges that defeat others. The grandchildren who eventually filled the mansion with laughter and chaos never doubted that family could be created through choice rather than biology, sustained through commitment rather than obligation. Andrew's stories about meeting their grandmother in the park became family legend that taught each new generation about recognizing opportunities for connection that might appear in unexpected forms. The bench where their story had begun remained a regular destination for family outings, where sparrows continued accepting breadcrumbs from gentle hands, while children learned about love that transcends conventional categories. The final decades of Andrew's life were filled with the kind of wealth that no financial portfolio could measure, relationships that provided meaning, work that created lasting positive impact, and the knowledge that resources accumulated through one generation's struggle had been deployed to improve circumstances for countless others. His mother's photograph continued watching from its silver frame, but now it was surrounded by images documenting family, created through crisis and maintained through choice. The foundation's endowment grew beyond Andrew's initial projections, ensuring sustainable funding for programs that would continue helping families long after current leadership transitioned to future generations. Medical schools studying their comprehensive care model began training healthcare professionals differently, recognizing that successful treatment required attention to family dynamics as well as clinical symptoms. Insurance companies gradually acknowledged that preventing family collapse through supportive services actually reduced long-term medical costs. The evening when Andrew peacefully passed away in his sleep at age 87, surrounded by family who'd been created through crisis and sustained through love, the city he'd called home for decades mourned not just a successful businessman, but a man whose personal transformation had changed thousands of lives. Memorial services at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Lincoln Park celebrated someone who demonstrated that wealth without purpose was poverty, that success without connection was failure, that destiny could be recognized, but had to be chosen. The park bench where their story had begun was eventually replaced by a memorial garden honoring Andrew's contributions to pediatric care and family support services. The inscription read simply, "For Andrew Dawson, who understood that the greatest wealth comes from sharing what we have with those who need what we can provide." Visitors to the garden often noticed that sparrows gathering for daily feeding seemed particularly friendly, as if inherited instincts remembered gentle hands that had once offered breadcrumbs with consistent generosity. Lily's career as an educator and researcher continued flourishing, with scholarly publications and practical innovations that helped thousands of children with medical challenges achieve their potential. Her unique combination of personal experience and academic expertise made her a sought-after consultant for healthcare systems struggling to balance clinical excellence with compassionate care. The research center bearing her name became internationally recognized for breakthrough studies examining connections between family stability and recovery outcomes. Maria's influence on pediatric nursing practice extended far beyond individual patient care, with training programs she'd developed being adopted by medical institutions nationwide. Her textbooks became standard curricula in nursing schools, ensuring that future healthcare professionals understood family dynamics surrounding childhood illness. Speaking engagements and consulting opportunities allowed her to share insights gained through personal crisis and professional development with audiences who recognized authentic expertise based on lived experience. The Foundation's impact continued expanding through partnerships with medical schools, education programs, and healthcare systems that adopted comprehensive approaches to childhood illness. Research funded through Foundation grants yielded pharmaceutical breakthroughs and therapeutic innovations that improved outcomes for children with conditions once considered untreatable. Awards and recognitions accumulated, But the most meaningful measurements remained individual success stories from families whose stability had been preserved during medical crises through comprehensive support systems. And you, have you ever met someone small who changed your life in an immense way? Have you discovered that sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what we accumulate, but from what we're willing to share? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this tale touched your heart, leave a like and subscribe so this message reaches another soul who needs to remember that love appears in the most unexpected places, often disguised as someone who needs our help, but ends up saving us instead. Because sometimes, the purest miracles come wrapped in the courage of a child who refuses to stop believing. And those are the moments that restore our faith in everything good this world still holds.